Hi everybody. I've been asked by some of you to talk about what to do with a bachelor's in psychology if you don't go to grad school either ever or right away. Many people want to still work in psychology but don't know where to start when it comes to getting a job. A large amount of jobs tend to be in the caring profession, direct care for clients who are for some reason in residential or outpatient care of some kind. This could be teenagers, children, it could be elderly folks, it could be adults. It varies a lot. But overall, these often have the same label when you're looking for jobs, or a very similar label. However, there are many variations of these labels, which I'll discuss later in the video. It could be childcare counselor, it could be caseworker, case manager, behavioral technician, psychiatric technician. Sometimes they'll even use the term therapist, which actually is not correct. Typically, a therapist has to have a master's, but some employers will use that term, so it can be tricky. These kind of jobs are often at residential facilities, group homes, you might have heard the term, or things like that. Sometimes juvenile hall, could be residential mental health treatment center or outpatient center. These places will often have entry-level jobs, which means you would be hired with a bachelor's in psychology, perhaps even less, and as a result, you'll probably get either minimum wage or slightly higher than minimum wage. You could eventually make more money there if there's supervisory roles that you can be promoted to, but that's not automatic. Typically in these kind of facilities, you're going to be supervised by somebody who is a master's level or higher professional, a social worker, a counselor, a clinician of some kind. That's the way it works. So you'll be kind of in the trenches doing the grunt work. It could be dispensing medicine sometimes that is needed, prescribed medicine. It could be helping with group therapy sessions. It could be just making sure the client goes to the various meetings and requirements they need to do, whether that be educational, therapeutic, or so forth. I worked in a group home for 3 years in California after I graduated undergraduate, and I was working with teenage girls. There was a on-campus high school, and there was some teaching assistants in there. There was cottages that the clients lived in, and there was counselors there who would help day-to-day operations, handing out medicine, making sure the clients were fed, making sure they went to their meetings and went to school, sometimes take them to court. You would have a social worker who would actually look after their bigger needs, like group therapy would be led by the social worker. And then they might be taken to court by the social worker or other requirements that were off campus. That is a normal structure you would see replicated across different kinds of group homes. In Macomb, we have Mosaic, which is a group home kind of setting as well for people with various different kind of mental health considerations, including developmentally disabled. They're typically adult, as far as I understand. Quite a few Western students work there part-time. That can be a good place to get experience if you're interested in doing that while you're a student. Some people work there more full-time. There's also Bridgeway in Macomb that is working with developmentally disabled adults particularly, and they also sometimes have positions for students or full-time entry level for psych students. If you're sticking in that area, again, the money prospects aren't enormous unless you go back to school at some point and get a master's and you can move up the chain. The one exception would be if it's correctionally related, meaning working with prisons, particularly in Illinois, can be quite lucrative. A basic entry-level prison guard job in Illinois can be $70,000 to $80,000 per year in the first year, which is more than I make now after 20 years of being an advisor. So that's really good starting money without having a master's degree. In fact, you can often start those jobs without completing your undergraduate degree. I think you should complete your undergraduate degree, but you can get a job as a prison guard with less education and make fantastic money. Of course, this is a stressful and high busy kind of environment, and there is a degree of threat to some extent, although I think correctional facilities that are run well, you're probably going to be pretty safe. But I can understand this would not be for every student. Now, the other realms that are outside of law enforcement and corrections and then basic psychological care would be in the business world. Many students go straight into corporate settings. Quite often you get an entry-level job in a corporate setting doing advertising or marketing. Many students will go into an entry-level position in human resources too as a first job, and then in all these cases rise up to the ranks through promotion. And these jobs can be quite well paid. Eventually those professionals do often go back and get a master's in either business administration, marketing, or human resources if that's possible. But you can actually make it pretty far up the chain promotions and make good money faster than you might make it in direct psychological care. So that's something to consider. One area I didn't talk about here a moment ago was law enforcement directly, meaning policing. Many police forces will accept you with an associate's degree or less, depending on the city and county that you apply to. So I think in Chicago, for instance, in Illinois, you have to have an associate's degree, make pretty good money, but again, high stress, high threat kind of environment, whereas you could get a position as a police officer in a smaller town like Macomb for much less money and lower standards of admission, aka I think less than an actual degree. I think you have to have at least a high school diploma, but it varies depending on the municipality. So you'd have to look and see that. Psychology students are attractive as personnel to work in policing or being a sheriff's deputy or working in probation and parole or in a prison. So they're jobs you'd want to look at, and they can be often better paid than that kind of minimum wage direct care job like I did. The facility I worked in was actually correctional too, but it's still paid pretty low, and it just varies. There might be some that are better, but by and large, you probably can have better prospects in law enforcement or corrections in general. Now I'm going to show you some slides here on the screen that are going to talk a bit more about the confusing nature of the different jobs and the way they're labeled when you're looking for them, and also a little bit about how to look up careers and understand what these different jobs do. We do have a career site at Western for psychology that'll talk to you about the different potential jobs out there and give you lots of example videos, which we'll see here in a moment. Looking at this chart from a recent report on psychology at WIU, we see this chart is about titles and job postings for bachelor's level psychology professionals. The reason I'm showing you this chart is to give you an idea of the many interchangeable terms used often to mean roughly the same thing. A lot of the jobs shown here are basically entry-level jobs that a bachelor's in psychology would be enough plus experience potentially to get, and they often sound very alike. There's no standard for this, and many institutions, employers will use these terms interchangeably. Things like managers, coordinators, case managers, family case managers, technicians, psychiatric technicians, behavior technicians, child protection workers, child counselors, child parent counselors, caseworkers, child caseworkers. You can see on the list here that there's quite a few different options, and it can be confusing. If you are confused by this, you're not alone. But I want to show you that when you're looking at job postings, if you're not going to graduate school, that all of these are things that you might be able to do, but you're going to have to read the specific ad for the job to see what the job requirements are. The key here is that probably if you're going to go into the workplace without going to grad school, the more experience you can get now, either in internships, volunteering, or a real part-time job while you're in undergraduate will be important. This chart shows various settings that you might find these jobs in, and from my experience, these are roughly correct. Quite often universities, individual family services, some government offices, mental health practitioner offices, maybe some hospital settings, substance abuse services and centers, child and youth services would be the most common. There's other you can see below, stretching down the list, but I'd say those top ones will be the most prominent ones I'm aware of when students often start working. In our community in Macomb, places like Mosaic or Ridgeway would be the kind of ones you'd be looking for. This last chart is worth considering in terms of the expectations of education for such jobs. Very interesting, you'll notice almost a quarter, no education required. 15% approximately high school, associates very low, bachelor's second highest 37%, and then master's only slightly higher, 38%. Of course, PhD pretty small, 13%. So you can see a large part of the jobs are only asking for a bachelor's in psychology. It's pretty good. Only a little more for masters, and you might say, well, why is it working in the masters then? The difference would be that probably master's level jobs and PhD will pay better and have better prospects. Quite often, again, as I said before, bachelor's degrees may not be quite as well paid. In fact, generally won't be. They might be minimum wage sometimes or slightly higher. At this stage, you may be asking yourself, what are all these jobs and what do I have to do in them? We'll talk about that here in a second. I want you to draw your attention to the Psychology Career Center page. I'll put the link down below the video for you to go to. This is a good repository of important information about different career paths and give you some examples of what these jobs might be like. It also includes at the top here the Discover Your Path ONET Interest Profiler, which is from the Department of Labor for federal government, where you can figure out what kind of personality you have that fits what kind of jobs. This is for students who may be really unclear about what they want to do, and they're trying to get a sense of what their skills might lead to. This isn't a perfect match. I always think these kind of things are entertaining and can be somewhat instructive, but they're not a be all and end all. They're not going to really predict the exact job you're going to be in, but they might give you an idea of what you should be focusing on based on your skills. If you scroll down below there, you'll see the link to PsyChi, which if you're an honors student level student, so high GPA, you might want to consider joining that. It's good for networking and finding jobs. Or just Psychology Club, because again, you'll want to fill up your resume with organizations and activities when you're in college besides just your classes. And then last but not least, the most important part of this page, in my opinion, are all these YouTube video interviews of people who work in various fields relating to psychology. There's a mental health section, working with children and families, working with the aging and disabled, working in business, working in the legal system, working in research or teaching. So if you click each of these, you can see that it will give you a day in the life of interview with these folks. They'll tell you about what education they needed, what did they do every day, and various kind of challenges, pluses and minuses to the job. I would recommend clicking all of these because you may never have even considered what you might do as part of this. But you can also pick out the ones that you think are most important to you to give you an idea. Now, some of these will require you to have a higher degree, like graduate school level, but some will not. So you want to look through them and see. But just as part of your journey to figure out what you're going to do, it's important to look at this because if you're thinking you won't go to graduate school, but you want a specific job you see here that does require a graduate level education, that might change your path and your mind about what you need to do. Obviously, if you're going to go on to graduate school, you've got to focus on getting your grades as high as possible and really ratcheting up what you put in your resume because you're going to be looked upon as a pretty competitive person looking at these jobs only if you have achieved pretty highly at an undergraduate level. Now, some people will graduate not done incredibly well in their undergraduate degree and feel maybe depressed about that, but that is not the end of the story. Some people will then get lots of experience to add to their GPA and other credentials. I actually did 5 years of not being at graduate school before I went back, and that helped me get into graduate school. Also, some people will consider doing a second bachelor's in some other area to raise their GPA. If you want to hear about that possibility and your GPA isn't going wonderfully well in your first degree, talk to me during an appointment.